All right, Ryan. I think we're kind of. I think we've just shortened up our breaks here a little bit, so we are a little ahead of schedule. But if everyone's okay with that, why don't we just power through?
Sure, yeah, you betcha. That sounds good to me.
Okay.
You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Excellent.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm doing this part. So,
Yeah.
our final presenter is Ryan Norton. Ryan is a fire and explosion investigator in Regina, Saskatchewan. He's also a wildland fire investigator and a captain with the Lumsden Fire Department. He's conducted over 300 fire investigations and has over 12 years of experience. He's also assisted in multiple major crimes investigations with the RCMP. All right, Ryan, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining me today. Today I'm just going to be going through some high level information in regards to wildfire losses that will hopefully be beneficial in some way to any future claims that may deal with these types of losses. To begin, I just wanted to go through some of the more common ways that wildfires can be ignited. In Canada, roughly half of all wildfires are actually caused by lightning. The other half, unfortunately, are caused by human activity. Wildfire activity it's strongly influenced by three factors. Fuels, so that's obviously what's being burned or ignited. It could be dry grass, crops, any sort of vegetation that's dry enough to ignite, which can then spread to nearby fuels and dry them out enough for them to become combustible as well, keeping that cycle going. Ignition sources, we're going to be going through some of the more common ignition sources right away here. And then weather. Weather can also be a big factor in not only starting a wildfire, but the spread of it. Especially wind-driven fires that are pushed rapidly due to windy conditions. In Saskatchewan today, so it's windy most days, and today is no exception. Large wildfires can create their own weather as well, including wind and dry lightning, which can then ignite other areas, creating additional fires within the wildfire area. So as I mentioned before, lightning is responsible for approximately 45% of wildfires. Lightning-caused fires are responsible for proportionally more area burned, just because lightning can occur in remote areas where fire detection and suppression are often delayed. Warmer temperatures translate into greater lightning activity, which generally leads to increased fire ignitions as well. So this is a stacked bar graph. This is showing the number of new human and new lightning-caused fire occurrences larger than 2 hectares for each day of the year from 1959 to 2018. So with more human-caused fires occurring more often in the spring and fall, often due to the dry conditions, and then lightning-caused fires being more frequent in the summer months when storms typically start to roll into the area. So now, in no particular order, let's just look at some of the more common human-influenced wildfire ignition sources. Campfires, campfires that have been left unattended or poorly extinguished, improper clearance, so overhanging trees or too close to trees or bushes, or construction poorly constructed, careless placement of wood, careless placement of the fire in general, improper discarding of coals or ashes, improper use of accelerants, and then careless discarding of matches. So you light that fire and toss the match into the bush, and sure enough, that's going to get going. Smoking can sometimes be used as an easy scapegoat in wildfire ignitions. They absolutely do happen. However, it's important to understand that for this to be considered as a cause, certain conditions must be met for ignition. There must be less than 22% relative humidity with an ambient temperature above 26.6 degrees Celsius and a loose, fine particulate fuel load in the area. Although it is important to recognize that microclimates can exist away from the weather station that the weather is being reported, so you do have to look at that as well. But they aren't the cause of as many fires as they're typically blamed for. Burning debris, so this includes burning agricultural material, clearing fires, controlled burns to clear agricultural materials. For these, it's important to ensure that you're following the local and municipal rules and regulations when burning. Things like checking the weather conditions, since it's not a good idea to do this type of burning on windy days. Check to ensure there's no fire ban or specific rule sets out by the municipality. And it's a good idea to do a black line around any sort of agricultural burning that you're going to do, which makes the fuel harder to, or the fire harder to spread due to there's no fuel next to the burning material. Equipment use, these can be caused by a wide range of equipment, things like ATVs, like all-terrain vehicles, agricultural vehicles, typical transport vehicles. Lots of different ways these can start fires. Exhaust particles from internal combustion engines can ignite nearby combustible material. Radiant or conductive heating from hot mufflers coming into contact with fine fuels like long grass or dried grass. Catalytic converters and metal fragments from vehicles getting tossed into the fine fuels next to the road or next to a trail. Rock or pavement strikes with equipment, chains dragging, mechanical breakdowns causing friction between metal parts creating heat. That frequently can happen with agricultural equipment. Sparks or friction created from normal usage. Even underinflated tires, they can compress, causing the wheels to come in contact, like the metal part of the wheel to come in contact with the road or trail, and it can cause sparks, especially in volatile fuel areas like long grass and things where you might be driving an ATV. The railroad in general can be an ignition source in many ways. Exhaust carbon being emitted from a train exhaust stack, or hot brake shoe particles coming into contact with fine fuels or railroad ties can ignite fires near or on the train tracks. Track maintenance issues, which can start fires from equipment use while fixing or maintaining the tracks, just things like grinders and welders. Wheel slippage or wheel bearing failures, which can cause sparks or friction heat that can also become an ignition source next to the railroad track. Children, unfortunately, do typically start some wildfires just due to their curious nature or possibly a deliberate act they may or may not fully understand. Children can be the cause of wildfire ignitions. Children frequently use easily accessible ignition devices, including matches and lighters. They can light paper or cardboard in an experimental fashion, or the dry fine fuels available outdoors. These can spread and get out of hand very quickly. Even things like a magnifying glass when you're curious, seeing how they can start fires, and occasionally they will get out of control. Arson or incendiary fires are deliberately or maliciously set fire with the intent to damage property or the environment, or possibly to defraud their insurance company. These seem to be happening more frequently, but it's also important to acknowledge that they can be used to blend in with additional fires set by someone else, or the reverse can happen, in that incendiary fires can be lit during a natural or accidental set fire to try and pass off the damage as accidental or natural for their own property. Case in point, this is a photo of a wildfire burning in northern Quebec in the summer of 2023. The news stated, Quebec man pleads guilty to setting 14 forest fires, burning hundreds of hectares. It is shocking to hear, but the reaction it provoked on social media was even more troubling for some. Following the publication of news articles, users on X, formerly known as Twitter, quickly accused the government and the media of deception, stating that it was arsonists and not climate change that was responsible for the amount and intensity of these fires. In reality, the Crown prosecutor working on the file confirmed to CTV News that the 38-year-old Quebec man had indeed ignited fires in central Quebec, scorching a little more than 900 hectares of land. To provide context, Quebec's Forest Fire Prevention Office reported that over 700 wildfires ravaged 4.5 million hectares across the province last year. So this implies that the man's actions were responsible for approximately 0.02% of the wildfires in 2023. So how does this relate to the importance of a proper wildfire investigation? Well, if people believe that arson caused significant wildfire damage, they might burn their own property for insurance payouts. Others might imitate the arsonist if they share similar ideologies. This increases the risk of wildfires transitioning into urban areas, causing widespread property damage and endangering lives. Therefore, it's crucial that qualified experts perform the investigations to uncover potential fraud or crimes. So along with the previously mentioned ignition sources, there's several additional sources that can be attributed to wildfires, not limited to those listed here, but things like power lines, fireworks, firearms, spontaneous heating, refraction, which also, like that would be, if you had a bottle of water, it actually has to be filled with water. It can cause a reflection or a refraction in light and concentrate that point of light and ignite a fire. Flying lanterns are a big pet peeve of mine. So now I just want to take a brief overview on how weather can affect wildfire activity. So weather, especially when it's hot, dry, and windy, it influences both the moisture content of fuels and the spread of fire. Wind affects the fire growth of an individual fire, affecting how fast it will spread and the size the fire will grow, while temperature and humidity affect overall annual wildland fire activity. So lower humidity and higher temperatures are driving extreme weather that makes wildfires more frequent and intense. The fire weather index that measures the dryness of the forest along with the temperature, humidity, level of precipitation, and wind speed. So overall, the fire weather index far exceeded the norm in nearly the entire country between June and August of 2023. When you look at that graphic, that's a pretty red looking country. So actually, yeah, 2023 was actually the worst year on record for wildfire activity. The hot, dry weather in Canada, especially in the northern regions, was ideal for wildfires. The 2023 wildfire season had the most area burned in Canada's recorded history, 18.496 million hectares, or 45.7 million acres. For reference, 45 million acres is more than twice the area of New Brunswick. That's what burned in 2023. All 13 provinces and territories were affected, with large fires in Alberta, British Columbia, Northwest Territories, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Quebec, with approximately 155,856 people displaced. So this map here was created by Canadian geographic cartographer Chris Brackley. It shows the area burned by forest fires in Canada since 1921. Previous decades of fire activity are portrayed in different colors, while 2023 is shown in white. Past active fire seasons have seen more individual fires, with 1989 still holding the record for 10,998 fires. 2023 is notable for the total area burned. The previous record was set in 1995 with 7.1 million hectares burned. And as mentioned, 2023 having a total of 18.49 million hectares burned. So that's a very significant jump. Climate change is predicted to increase lightning ignitions, the occurrence of more severe fire weather, fire season length, the fire intensity, area burned, emissions, and both the occurrence and frequency of fires in many regions in Canada. Record-breaking years are becoming more common. 2013 2014, 2017, 2018, 2021, and 2023 were all very big fire years in Western Canada. Okay, so we've discussed things that can cause and contribute to wildfires. How do you actually investigate them? How do you determine if a wildfire was caused by arson or lightning or any of the other many potential causes? Let's just take a quick look here at how that process works. First, the notification. The first step is receiving a notification of a wildfire incident, often through adjusters, insurance companies, law offices, that are involved in representing people or companies that have been affected by the fire in some capacity. Investigators arrive at the scene, ensuring safety, securing the area, and beginning preliminary observations. A big part of the scene assessment is safety precautions. So investigators prioritize safety, assessing risks such as unstable terrain, hazardous materials, downed power lines, other issues with utilities and weather conditions. Even animals can be a concern. Scene boundaries and documentation. So establishing the boundaries of the scene helps focus investigative efforts and preserve evidence. And detailed documentation can include photographs, maps, sketches, things that are used to capture the scene's condition as you arrive. Fire dynamics. So understanding fire behavior, including the rate of spread, direction, and intensity, helps reconstruct the sequence of events. Fire pattern analysis. Identifying fire patterns on vegetation, structures, and terrain aids in determining the fire's origin and progression. So in this image, I'd rappelled partway down of a cliff so I could document fire patterns on these trees to try and determine the direction of fire spread during this wildfire. So as discussed earlier, it's important to determine the scene boundaries for an investigation. The first step is to identify the general origin area. So using available evidence, including witness statements, physical evidence, fire behavior analysis, and macro indicators, which are large-scale fire patterns that provide clues about the fire's origin, spread, and behavior, investigators can pinpoint the general origin area of where the fire began. So that's a large area where that fire began, somewhere in there. So, pardon me. Once the general origin area has been identified, investigators can now use micro indicators, which are small scale fire patterns that help pinpoint the fire's origin. These indicators require close examination and analysis. They are used to trace the path of a fire to a smaller, more contained area called the specific origin area. Once this area has been identified, investigators can use techniques to find any potential ignition causes, ruling them in or out depending on specific conditions. For example, as we discussed earlier, if a cigarette butt is found, but the weather states that the humidity has been in the 90% range for days and the temperature is only 10 degrees Celsius, that ignition source can likely be ruled out. The fire pattern indicators mentioned can be classified into 11 different categories. These categories are based on how the fire pattern indicator is formed and the material upon which they are found. These are used to determine the path of fire spread and can be found on usually on both large and small scale objects and fuels. Let's just look at a few of those. So protection patterns. Protection patterns are created when a non-combustible object or the fuel itself shields the unexposed side of a fuel from heat damage. So fuels will be unburned or exhibit less damage, less staining, less sooting, and less white ash on the side that's unexposed to the fire's advance. Grass stem patterns. The charred remains of grass stems left in the fire's wake will have different appearances dependent on the direction of the fire's travel and intensity. In advancing fire areas, the flames will attack the stem from the top and burn them to the ground level, consuming all but the very base of the stem on the side that the fire originated. In a slower burning backing fire area with long grass, the fire will attack from the bottom of the stem, which then it consumes the stalk. The seed head itself will remain intact and will generally fall pointing toward the fire's origin. Foliage freeze. This occurs when leaves and small stems are heated. They tend to become soft and pliable and easily bent in the direction of the prevailing wind. They often remain pointed in this direction as they cool and stiffen following the passage of the flame front. So it looks like they're being blown even though there is no wind on that day. Angle of char. This can happen when the fire burns up to, past, and beyond a standing fuel, such as a tree, utility pole, or bush. The angle at which the charred surface of an object is oriented relative to the fire's point of origin. So this angle helps investigators determine the fire's direction of spread and intensity. When the fire's passage only heats and dries out the canopy of a tree or bush without actually charring, then it's called angle of scorch. So as you can see on this picture, the fire is moving from the left-hand side of your screen to the right-hand side of your screen. Spalling. So this pattern will appear as shallow, light-colored craters or chips in the surface of rocks within a fire area. Spalling is caused by exposure to the heat or flame. Rocks aren't efficient conductors of heat energy, and when subjected to the oncoming fire, the outermost layer of the rock becomes hotter than the rock layer underneath it. So the differential expansion causes the outer layer to break off and chip away. That usually occurs after the fire has gone through. Curling. So curling occurs when green leaves curl inwards towards the heat source. Not normally used as a macro indicator. They can also exhibit wind influenced foliage freeze, but heat exposures causes the leaf to dry out and to shrink. And then the shrinkage causes the edges to curl in towards the heat source. This usually occurs with slower moving, lighter burned areas. Sooting. So black carbon-based deposits caused by incomplete combustion and the natural fatty oil content in some vegetation. This carbon is typically more heavily deposited on the side facing the approaching fire. The soot can be deposited on surfaces such as rocks, fencing material, and other non-combustible surfaces. Staining. Staining is caused by vaporized volatile oils and resins in the flame and smoke column condensing on the cooler surfaces of objects. So while similar to sooting, staining will appear glossy, pale yellow to dark brown in color. It cannot be rubbed off. It might feel tacky to the touch, and white ash may adhere to it. While sooting is dull and black in color and can be rubbed off with your fingers, and white ash will generally not adhere to the sooting. White ash. There are two subsets of this indicator. White ash caused by exposure to heat and flame and still in place on its host vegetation is a product of more complete combustion. More white ash will be created on the sides of objects exposed to greater amounts of heat. And then white ash from burned combustible material can be dispersed downwind and deposited on the windward side of objects, especially if staining has already occurred. Generally, fuels facing the oncoming fire will be lighter on the exposed side and darker on the unexposed side. So sometimes you don't even actually see any white ash deposits on anything until you walk around an area in a 360-degree fashion. Cupping. This pattern is the concave or cup-shaped char pattern observed on grass stem ends, small stumps in the area of 10-inch diameter or less, and the terminal ends of bush and small tree limbs on the side of the fire's origin. So this pattern can indicate the direction from which the fire approached and provides clues about the fire's point of origin and its movement. And then finally, the V or U-shaped patterns. This is the overall V or U shape associated with typical wildfire progression in the early stages of the fire. The ignition area is generally located in the area of less intense burning near the cup of the U or the apex of the V. If possible, it's recommended to view this pattern from an aerial perspective. These are very important as well in finding your general origin area. So why investigate claims? The big challenge isn't the house that burned down from an identification standpoint. Those are the easy ones. The difficulty lies with the smaller claims because of the sheer number of them and because they are not so straightforward to quantify and settle. This can include damage to roofs and decks from embers and heat damage to siding, smaller scale damage like that. So looking into types of fraud, I guess here, these types of things can happen for a lot of weather events, whether it be hail, flooding, wind, etc. Anything really, not just wildfire, but people may claim damages for items or structures that did not exist prior to the wildfire, or exaggerate the value of items lost. In extreme cases, property owners may intentionally set fire to their property to collect insurance payouts, disguising arson as a wildfire incident. Property owners may fail to disclose pre-existing damage or neglect to maintain their property adequately, hoping to pass off old damage as wildfire related, much like Alexia talked about in her discussion. Also, during the Fort McMurray wildfires, several instances of fraud and scams emerged. People were taking advantage of the chaos and the vulnerability of the people affected by the wildfires. One of the biggest obstacles insurance companies faced in Fort McMurray is resource scarcity. They just don't have the adjusting staff to handle all the claims, so they end up having to rely on the judgment of contractors and tradespeople to assess damages and determine if they are pre-existing or event-related. These assessments have been known to cause problems, and it boils down to two simple facts: insufficient technical expertise to determine the cause of damage post-loss, and an inherent bias in their involvement in assessing damage. Siding installer, for example, may have experience judging sun damage, but it's unlikely you'll find one that has seen and studied wildfire damage. Often they don't know what radiant heat damage looks like and are therefore unable to assess it properly. The second issue, biased inspections, is something we've seen a lot of in Fort McMurray. While there are many contractors and tradespeople who did incredible work in the wake of the wildfire, there are also those who tried to capitalize on the trust afforded to them by their insured clients. For example, roofing companies identifying holes from a satellite dish as ember burn marks and declaring that it needed to be replaced. We've been brought in to do investigations into vinyl siding, only to discover that the damage being claimed is on the wrong side of the house. We've investigated countless cases of ember damage to shingles that have turned out to just be wear and tear. One woman in Fort McMurray wanted her insurance company to replace her deck, and while it was in serious need of repair, it hadn't sustained any damage from the fire. It was simply old and neglected. Nevertheless, her position was, both of my next door neighbors had their decks replaced. I want mine replaced too. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the more typical damages associated with wildfire claims. Direct flame contact. So direct contact with flame is one of the most obvious and immediate ways property can be destroyed in a wildfire. Intense heat from the flames can ignite flammable materials such as wood, vegetation, and synthetic building materials, leading to rapid and extensive destruction. Ember showers and flying brands. Flying embers from vegetation and burning debris carried by the wind can travel long distances ahead of the main fire front. These embers can land on roofs, decks, or in gutters, igniting combustible materials and starting spot fires that can quickly engulf structures. Radiant heat. Even if flames do not directly touch a building, the intense radiant heat from a nearby wildfire can still cause ignition. Radiant heat can break windows, melt siding, and ignite flammable materials within the structure, leading to internal fires and structural collapse. Secondary effects. Even if the property survives the initial fire, it may still be at risk of secondary effects such as smoke damage, ash infiltration, and water damage from firefighting efforts. These secondary effects can further compromise the integrity of the structure and pose health hazards to the occupants. Contributing factors in the extent of damage of a wildfire can do, that includes topography. The slope and shape of land can significantly impact a property's vulnerability to wildfire. Homes located on steep slopes or in narrow canyons may be more susceptible to fire spread due to increased wind speeds and fire behavior. Vegetation and fuel. Properties surrounded by dense vegetation or located in heavily forested areas are at a higher risk of wildfire damage. Dry vegetation acts as fuel, providing ample material for the fire to spread and intensify. Infrastructure damage. Wildfires can damage infrastructure, critical infrastructure such as power lines, water systems, and roads, hindering firefighting efforts and exacerbating property damage. Loss of power and water supply can also impede residents' ability to defend their homes or evacuate safely. So all of this makes it extremely important that you employ skilled investigators to conduct thorough investigations into wildfire claims, including on-site inspections and interviews with claimants and witnesses. Some things that we want to look at or look into: which structures burned and which ones did not. Was it due to their location, construction, or the immediate area around the structure? Is the fire loss inside the main body of the wildland fire or on the periphery? Was the construction on the affected building wood, masonry, or metal? How well was the property maintained? Was there tall vegetation around the structure? Did any witnesses notice anything unusual? Were windows and doors left open? Were personal property or valuables removed? What did the first responders, including police and fire departments, witness? And what tactics were used to extinguish it? The last point I wanted to mention is in regards to a program called FireSmart. FireSmart is a national program that helps Canadians increase neighborhood resilience to wildfires and to minimize its negative impacts. Some of the ideas that it touches on are clearing fuel concentrations from around your home, removing dead fuels like grass, pine, and spruce needles, and branches from around walls, fences, propane tanks, and barbecues, storing firewood a minimum of 10 meters away from any building, clearing gutters, eaves, and vents of collected materials. In a wildfire, the fewer combustibles a home has around the roof, the better. Ensure your roof is free of needles and leaves, and there are no overhanging trees or branches that can catch on fire. Keeping your windows clear. Windows let heat in or out in the winter. Clear vegetation at least 3 meters or 10 feet away from your windows. In a wildfire, unshuttered windows let the heat in and can contribute significantly to your possessions catching on fire. If you don't have pre-made shutters, it's easiest to just ensure that you clear the vegetation away from those windows. Trimming your trees. If the trees in your yard have branches that reach the ground, like a spruce tree would, trim those branches to a height of 2 to 3 meters or 6 to 10 feet. Clear any burnable materials from around the base of your trees. Avoid planting cedar, juniper, pine, tall grass, and spruce, as they can ignite easily. Keeping your porch or deck clear or screened. The space under a deck makes for a great storage area. Unless it's sealed against sparks, that storage space will collect sparks during a wildfire. In the spring, screen in your deck or clear away all burnable fuels from that area. Screen or seal all soffits. This is for the same reason as screening your deck. Unfortunately, it's not feasible to clear out all the burnable material from the soffits. The only real option is to screen them in. And take care of your lawn. Keep your sprinklers handy. A short and green lawn can help create can help create a fire break around your home. This is made more effective with the addition of a few lawn sprinklers and a sprinkler that can be placed on the roof. Sprinklers can increase the relative humidity around your home and decrease the fuel available for ignition. So with those sprinklers going, you're just that much less likely to have your home ignite. That's it there. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been my pleasure.
All right, thank you, Ryan. We do have a couple questions already. So why don't we do those? And this was our last presentation, so go ahead, get your questions in. You will have a chance to submit any additional questions for anyone else who presented when we close the webinar. You'll be prompted. But for you, Ryan, so does it not make sense to log a buffer zone around towns to prevent towns from burning?
It absolutely does, and a lot of northern communities do that. You're 100% right that I think that's something we're gonna see a lot more of in the future. Yeah, things like this and like studying these wildfires and their effects is getting more and more common. So I do actually think that's going to be a lot more plausible in the future. Yep, very good point.
Yeah, I think I actually read about Banff National Park. I think they're doing a fire break right now.
Yeah, that would make perfect sense. Yeah, I would, if I lived especially in a northern community or somewhere that's prone to wildfires, I would want my town to be doing that for sure. It's so much harder to extinguish a fire once it enters urban land. It's urban interface fire. It makes it a lot trickier to extinguish. So.
I've heard about fires burning underground for years. Can you explain what occurs and what fire behaviors these will show?
Yeah, they can burn into like peat or moss or things like that underneath the forest floor and even get snowed on and then reignite the following spring. What happens is that fuel just smolders. There's just enough oxygen in there to keep it smoldering, and then the snow will melt and it'll maybe a windy day will come along and it'll kind of start igniting again, and you'll see it pick up. Yeah, that can definitely happen.
Do rooftop sprinklers make a big difference in fire loss / prevention?
Oh, a huge difference. I used to work and extinguish wildfires a lot, actually, and that was one of the biggest preventative methods that we could do was go to a community that was going to be affected by it, or the fires going towards that community. We would put sprinklers on each house, just on the roofs, and it creates a bubble of humidity around that house, around that community, and it just keeps the fire out. Like it's almost like a force field around that house. It's amazing how well that works. But it has to be on the roofs because like I had talked about, those firebrands and flying embers and stuff, they'll land on your roof and ignite things like that. We had other people try and do it surrounding the town, but that doesn't work as well because the roofs are not, they're exposed then, right? The humidity is not built up around the houses. It's built up around a different area, I guess, more the town, and it's not protecting the structures. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Great. We actually have this extra bit of fire smart info that was submitted. Remove the straw type material, so like a straw welcome mat. Remove that away from your door or entryway when there's a fire eviction notice. They're very flammable. So
absolutely, yeah, that's a very good point for sure. Yeah.
How much of a risk are down power lines to starting wildfires?
That can definitely happen. Yep, for sure. We've seen it before. It happens often here in Saskatchewan. SaskPower is usually, that's who we have for our utility out here is SaskPower. But just because of where we are here in Saskatchewan, it's often it will go into crops, and then those crops can catch fire. But yeah, that's a definite risk that can happen.
Is yeah, sorry, this one's kind of coming in sections, so I'll try and get through it here. So I live in Okanagan, where there are a lot of wood fire stoves in more rural homes. So ash and soot are often present in many summer and vacation homes outside of forest fires. Based on your experience, is there a way to determine when an amount of soot or ash becomes hazardous to a person? Similarly, is ash or soot harmful to the skin, or just when ingested or breathed in?
Geez, that's a very good question. I'm to be honest, I'm not too sure about that one. I know, like, just from my experience with being in wildfire scenarios and fighting them or doing emergency management stuff, it feels, after a few hours, it feels like you've smoked a pack of cigarettes, and it's a terrible feeling. So I can't imagine it being too great, but I'm not sure, honestly, of the concentrations or anything like that.
So coming back to a previous question on the roof sprinklers, so is it worth it for homeowners to get their own?
In my personal opinion, yes. Yes, it is. There is companies that will come and do that for you as well. And depending on where you're located, your province might be doing something like that as well to combat the wildfires. I know we do in Saskatchewan. I think we had something like 15 kilometers of hoses and hoses and pumps going to protect a community, a northern community, and we just had sprinklers on each house. So it kind of depends, but yeah, in my personal opinion, it's well worth it. Well worth getting some sort of setup like that. And if you do it for yourself, then you're not reliant on somebody else either, right? So
Yeah, no, good point. Sorry, I'm just reading. So we're back in the the underground peat fires here. Any defenses available to homeowners or insureds from that? What kind of liability exposure do they have?
that's a good question. It would kind of depend on the scenario. Most of the ones that I know of are fairly large scale, and they're kind of undetectable, as far as I know, until they pop up again. That's a good question. If the person there can leave me their name and number and stuff, or email, I can get back to them with a proper answer on that one.
Yeah, great. We'll follow up on that one via email. How effective is metal roofing and siding at avoiding ember ignition?
That's quite a good defense for sure. Yeah, that's obviously it's not going to ignite nearly as much as shingles are, right? It'll still be important to clear them off and make sure your gutters are clean, all combustible materials, but that would be a good defense for sure.
Okay. So here's a comment here on the sprinklers again. So just from this person, I'm a part of a volunteer fire department near where I live. Last year, I had the opportunity to be part of a structural protection unit in Kelowna. The humidity you can get from sprinkler systems is amazing. It keeps the embers extinguished that fall and build up around sidewalks. So yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's exactly the point of it all, and they work extremely well. You guys probably out in BC, you probably see that a lot more. Even here in Saskatchewan, it's mostly in the north, but yeah, I was surprised by how well they work.
I think that we'll give everyone another couple minutes to come up with questions. Like I said, we did wrap up a little early because we kind of shortened some breaks there. So yeah, Ryan, if you want to stick around for another 5 minutes, just in case anyone thinks of any last minute questions. But yeah, otherwise, absolutely. Yeah, everyone, thank you so much for attending this year. Like I said, when you close GoToWebinar, you're going to be prompted with a survey, but also an opportunity to ask any questions for Ryan or any previous presenters that maybe you didn't get around to when they were up. So again, thank you everyone, and have a great day. Oh, and just just gonna follow up here. Yes, and to confirm, we won't be sharing slides from these presentations, but we will be sharing the actual video presentations. So if you want to review them again, you'll have that opportunity. And I'm just, I'll preempt anyone from asking questions about continuing education certificates. Like I said, we're going to get those out as soon as possible. I know renewals are up for a number of provinces, so we will try and be as quick as we can. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. Thank you, and thank you, Ryan. Sorry, forgot to
Yeah,
say.
you betcha. Thanks, everybody. And any additional questions, just email them or phone me. My number and email are up there.
Yeah, there you go.